आज का जो विषय है ये 3 यानी कि अनेक धाराओं को जोड़ने की कोशिश करेगा। प्रकृति या कुदरत, इतिहास या तारीख और विज्ञान। और जहां तक जीव जंतुओं का सवाल है, फॉनल कंजर्वेशन और भारत खास करके 1947 के पश्चात यहाँ जो गतिविधियां रही हैं, यहाँ जो समस्याएं रही हैं, जो चुनौतियां रही हैं, इस पर आजकल हर कोने में चर्चा है। एक इतिहासकार के कई भूमिकाएं होती हैं और सबसे अहम भूमिका है एक सूत्रधार की। हम जो बीता हुआ युग है, बीता हुआ काल है, उसको एक नए परिप्रेक्ष्य में रखते हैं, इस वजह से कि आने वाले कल के लिए जो तैयारी होती है, आने वाले कल के लिए हमें जो खुद एक समाज के हैसियत से जो सोच विचार की जरूरत है, अपने गतिविधियों में जो परिवर्तन की आवश्यकता है, उसके लिए कुदरत के सवाल को समझे बगैर, इस बहुत जटिल समस्या को सुलझे बगैर हम आगे नहीं जा सकते। The theme of nature, science and history is very important to a country like India. When you look at the history of independent India, it is very striking that two of the very key figures in the early years after independence encountered this question very early on. One was C. Rajagopalachari, and as director Nehru Memorial, it was my privilege to be in the institution which had his papers. As you know, C. Rajagopalachari in 1947-48 was a very busy man. He was preparing to take over as the first Indian head of state of independent India. He took over from Lord Mountbatten. You all know Lord Mountbatten was the last viceroy of independent India. Many may not know that he first proposed to Edwina Mountbatten in the Viceregal Lodge in what is now the Vice Chancellor's office of Delhi University. And before that, he was part of the trip which went to Nepal, where he shot a rhinoceros. There was debate on how large the rhinoceros was. So 3 military officers signed a letter saying that it was a large rhinoceros with big horns. Because one of the features of British military civil elite in India was that they hunted a lot of animals. The idea of killing over 100 tigers, shooting the largest tiger, was very important to the British viceroys and to their associates. Prior to Mountbatten, the viceroy was Lord Wavell. And Lord Wavell was once in a shoot with Mountbatten, and this is recounted in his book Viceroy at Bay. And he asked Corbett, what will happen to the tiger when we leave India? And Corbett said the tiger will have no future. Every Indian will have the right to vote. The peasants will want to cut the trees. They may want to shoot the tigers which take their cattle. I do not give the tiger more than 20 years, Corbett said. The other I want to recount was Lord Linlithgow, who visited the Gir forest. The Gir forest was the last forest by 1900 where there were lions left outside Africa. The lion is a very important animal across centuries in Indian cultures. You know, I am now in the Kriya University in Chittoor district, Andhra Pradesh. And one of the legendary figures of political history of Andhra Pradesh was N.T. Ramarao Garu, who's now no more. In one of his great rallies, he called it the Simha Garjana rally, the rally of the lion's roar. And the lion is very important in the Pallava kingdoms. Those of you who may not know much about Pallavas would have seen the very beautiful stone sculptures of Mahabalipuram, and one of them is of a lioness stalking a prey. And if you sit and look at it carefully, you will realize the person who cut that sculpture knows exactly how lioness stalks the prey. So Lord Linlithgow went to Gir forest. He was guest of Nawab of Junagadh, and he could have been guest of Maharaja Bhavnagar, who also had part of Gir forest, or of the Maharaja Baroda, who had an area known as the Kodinar Gir. In these areas, with the permission of Maharajas, you could shoot a lion, and Lord Linlithgow shot a lion. Lord Linlithgow was a kindly man. The photo shows him with the dead lion and with his gun and with 43 beaters. So he had 43 people chase the lion to a machan where he shot it. Rajaji was asked some years after, for months after independence, what to do about the Governor General's shooting blocks. So when you look at the map of India today, it's around 3.2 million square kilometers. The map of India before independence, it was around 4 million square kilometers. It included the areas which are now the nation states of Pakistan and Bangladesh until 1937 Burma. And this is a vast area in which different regions were famous for different kinds of big game. Lord Harding wrote a book called On Hill and Plain. It's from his big game shooting diary. And the titles are The Tigers of Gwalior, The Bison of Mysore, The Hangul of Kashmir, The Sanggrouse of Bikaner. So Lord Harding went from one place to the other. He shot different animals. Some were for eating, like the grouse. Some were for keeping the skin, such as of the tiger. Some were for mounting the head on the wall, like the bison or the gaur of Mysore. M.D. Chaturvedi was the first Indian Inspector General of Forests. He was not yet Inspector General. He was, as the name must tell, from Uttar Pradesh. This was a different India. M.D. Chaturvedi said, Governor General, sir, what to do about shooting blocks and the Shivaliks? So Governor General had exclusive shooting blocks. They were reserved forests. In the reserved forest, there were shooting blocks. There were closed and open seasons. And in the open season, you got a license. You shot sambar or cheetal. And there was no license required, of course, for the Viceroy, or if you were above a certain rank of commandanted officer. Rajaji said that, what do you think? M.D. Chaturvedi was a famous shikari. He was to shoot over 50 tigers in his lifetime. He made a comment which would today be unacceptable to us, both for his attitude to tigers and to women. In the passing out parade of the first Indian batch of Forest Service officers, he said, and I'm sure, please forgive me, I'm quoting him, they were all men. He said, जब आप शादी करने जाते हैं तो दहेज में आप गहने और सोना मत मांगिएगा, आप बंदूक लीजिएगा. Ask for gun in dowry, not for the gold and jewelry. क्योंकि पहले साल में अगर आपने एक बाघ का शिकार करके उसे मार नहीं गिराया तो आप DFO होने लायक नहीं है. You are not fit to be divisional forest officer. You cannot shoot tiger in the first year. This is not peculiar to India. The British ruled large parts of East Africa, and right up to 1970s, you were not allowed to become member of the wildlife of the game guard. You were not allowed to be game warden in Kenya unless you stopped and shot a bull elephant. Rajaji and Chaturvedi decided that freedom in India should not be only for the human beings, it should also be for the animals of Shivaliks. And Rajaji said, I will not only give up my shooting rights, you ask government of UP to gazette that it be made a wildlife sanctuary. It is today the Rajaji National Park. That is how it gets the name Rajaji. It's in the Shivaliks, and it was a very important place because a very key British officer worked in these areas. The officer most famous who was from Uttarakhand was not in the civil or military service, though he served in the army with distinction in First World War. He was important in training in Second World War, was Jim Cobbett. Colonel Jim Cobbett was actually a timber contractor, and the Cobbett Park was to be named after him when India became independent in 1955. Very unusual. But Cobbett Park was a very peculiar kind of Englishman. He was third, fourth generation Indian. He was a domiciled Englishman. When we think of British Empire, it was defined by race. You know, whites were at the top, Anglo-Indians below, and so on and so forth. Well, between the white people who were from Britain, that is England, Wales, Scotland, Ireland, there were domicile whites, people born and brought up in India by white parents and grandparents in India. He was one of them. And in his book, Geoffrey Ward, who has written about US Civil War, says that Jim Corbett always felt excluded. For instance, it would have been unthinkable for a white woman from England to marry someone like him. Please note he remained a bachelor, but perhaps for other reasons. It's interesting that Cobbett was to write that his role model was a man called F.W. Champion, a forest officer, who in 1919 gave up shooting animals except for food and took to something remarkable, photography. And it was Champion who wrote the books Jungle in Sunlight and Shadow and With a Camera in Tigerland. The Shivaliks, the Rajaji National Park, is the area where Champion worked. So Rajaji is a very interesting figure. The slightly older people may recall that in 47-48, he gave series of lectures on All India Radio on the Mahabharata and Ramayana. Now, it's not widely known that C. Rajagopalachari was a formidable linguist. He not only knew Tamil and Sanskrit well, he also spoke, wrote, and he could speak, read, and write Telugu equally well. So these Ramayanas he gave on the All India Radio. He wrote up in Tamil, and later it was translated to English and very popular with Bharati Vidyabhavan. I want to draw your attention to something you may have missed. During the long period of exile, Yudhishthira and the four Pandavas received a very interesting delegation. Now, this is in the book by the Rajagopalachari, and recently, a few years ago, my distinguished colleague, Professor Upinder Singh, brought out a book on violence in ancient India. In that, there is a chapter, Wilderness, and she comes to the same episode. The animals of the forest came in a delegation. Now, we don't know how they selected the delegation, but this is a very famous poem, Mahabharata. So they came to Yudhishthira and said that we are very worried about presence of Pandavas in the forest. So Yudhishthira wanted to know why. They said at the rate that you are killing us, there won't be any of us left. So Yudhishthira said that we have to hunt in order to eat. And the Pandavas, of course, as you know, were Kshatriya. And if you read the various versions of Mahabharata or hear them, one of the marks of the Pandavas in the forest is that the animals knew that they are very particular men. They could make out by the way they walked, the way they carried their bows, the way they walked fearlessly, that they were very strong. Particularly, you can think of certain Pandavas who represent strength in symbolic terms. Arjuna with archery, Bhima with the sheer physical strength and martial prowess. So Yudhishthira made a very interesting suggestion. He said for 1 week we will hunt in one part of the forest. Another week we will hunt in another part of the forest. We will kill only 1 or 2 animals. Professor Upinder Singh argues that this is a measure of how power, political power, military power is tempered by compassion. And there are many instances of compassion. My distinguished colleague who studies cranes, Professor Gopi Sundar, he has studied very important animal in North India, the Saras crane. Saras crane is supposed to mate for life. And he pointed me to a very interesting paper as Sanskritist, where 2 of the Kurinji birds are killed by hunter. And the person who witnessed them composed a verse in Sanskrit, the shloka. And the tradition holds this is Valmiki. And some scholars have argued those 2 birds actually are the Saras cranes. The pain which is felt is not only at the death of bird, but the death of killing one creature which is loved by another creature. Now, for Rajaji to be critical of hunting was perhaps natural. He was a lifelong proponent of ahimsa. And when you take the idea of ahimsa and take it from the human and apply it to the animal world, how can there be a place for hunting, particularly for pleasure? Well, the reality is in 1947, India was a very different country from what it is today. It had just been through partition. Millions of refugees had to be resettled. One of the places they were resettled was along the Tarai. The Tarai is a great belt of North India, begins somewhere in West UP, goes through the Nepal and Bhutan, Sikkim, right up to Assam. Traditionally, it had very tall grasslands, wet grasslands. It's known as elephant grass. The reason is good. Suppose you sit on top of elephant and ride through the grass, people will just about be able to see. In the late 19th century, J.H. Baldwin wrote that this was the most favored haunt in India of tigers, of swamp deer, of hog deer, and until the 1870s of other animals, the wild buffalo or the arana and the rhinoceros. You may recall, and even people who don't study history will recall, that Harappa and Mohenjo-daro, one of the very famous seals, is of the one-horned rhinoceros. It's clearly a one-horned rhinoceros. The hide is of a one-horned rhinoceros. The horn is of one-horned rhinoceros. As late as 1520s, Ziauddin Muhammad Babur hunted rhinoceros near Peshawar. By the late 19th century, rhinoceros had vanished right across the Indus and Ganga basin. It was found in Brahmaputra basin in some small pockets, and in the Teesta basin, and in the Rapti river valley. That's where it survives till today. So the shrinkage of the range of the rhinoceros, not only in numbers because it was hunted, but because the lands were cleared, that gets a final blow in the post-Second World War phase. Clearing of Tarai was assisted not only by arrival of very large numbers of refugees who were settled in these areas, areas now in news, Lakhimpur, Kheri, Pilibhit, these were areas which were cleared. The clearance was facilitated by the arrival of DDT, a very important chemical compound which was used to eliminate the mosquitoes with other negative effects, and also with new anti-malarial drugs, both of which became easy to obtain at the end of Second World War. The end of Second World War also left in India many jeeps which were sold as second-hand. Over 2 million Indians served in the war. Over 1 million of them served in Army, Navy, Air Force. And one of the features of Indian Army is when you go back as a Jawan, you are allowed to take your gun home. They did. And many were issued crop protection guns to protect the crops from the wild animals, wild boars, nilgai, and deer who raid the crops. So there's a very interesting situation where beginning in Second World War, there was a free-for-all for nature. The Grow More Food campaign launched in the war to grow more food for the war effort became a Grow More Food campaign of independent India. It may interest you to know that from 1870s, British Raj gave out big rewards for killing, and I quote the exact words, dangerous beasts and venomous snakes. And these records are available to us. I earlier computed the records, and the numbers are quite staggering. In a 50-year period, every year, over 1,600 tigers 2,000 leopards, 2,000 bulls were killed for rewards. These programs continued. As late as 1969-70, it was reported in UP that the ठेकेदार, the contractor, जो बांध बनाते, who built bunds, they made the bund, they created a small pond or lake, talab, to provide drinking water, irrigation, and they maintained it. After some time, magarmach, that is the freshwater crocodile, would come here. So all that the ठेकेदार्स had to do is kill the magarmach, the crocodile, and take it to the tahsildar, and they would get a reward. May interest you to know, in true imperial tradition, they calculated the reward after taking out a measuring tape and finding out the length of the crocodile. The longer the crocodile, the more the reward. This was very important also for animals such as the wolf, which had a very vast range in India. The wolf was animal of the open areas. I am using Mahabharata analogy because it may be familiar to many people in the room. You know, one of the names of Bhima is Vrikodara. Vrikodara means the one with the belly of the wolf. So this refers to the wolf being very hungry. Suppose two wolves get into the pen where the sheep goats are there, they'll kill a lot of them. So leopards, wolves were also eliminated on large scale, and many of these schemes continued in independent India. I want to emphasize that even in 1960s, you can see a book called Fodor's Guide to India. So 1964, I think, if you come, there are 6-7 pages on hunting. It tells you where to go in Connaught Place. Now Connaught Place is called Rajiv Chowk. That time it was after Earl of Connaught. And in Connaught Place, which shop you go, and it says that don't be frauded. Sports outfitters don't pay more than 40,000 rupees. That's a lot of money at that time. For 40,000, they will do what is called Shikar and Bandobast. There is a book called Shikar and Bandobast. That is, they will arrange for your travel to an area. There will be a tent, there will be food, and they will take you out, they will tie up the bait and will shoot the tiger. So by 1950s and 60s, there is also concern about these changes. The first president of India was Babu Rajendra Prasad. And you all know Rajendra Prasad went to Gujarat because he participated in ceremony of Somnath temple, and there's a lot of debate between him and Jawaharlal Nehru. But the other part of that visit, there is no debate. They agreed. He went to the Gir forest. He's the first president of India to visit Gir forest. And there's photo of Babu Rajendra Prasad with the foresters of Gir forest. Junagadh Nawab, as you know, ran away to Pakistan. Arzi Hukumat was declared, Samal Das Gandhi, and then it became part of Saurashtra. At that time, it was Saurashtra. Gujarat came into being in 1960. Whereas Linlithgow went with his gun and all his beaters and experts, to paraphrase famous Hindi film song, Babu Rajendra Prasad, Jungle mein gaye chhadi ke saath. He had his walking stick. So you can see him with the chhadi. I see there is something very interesting happening here. Few years later, the Gir forest had another visitor, Jawaharlal Nehru. And the newspaper of Rajkot, it is still there, is called Phool Chhap. It's a Gujarati paper, and I am giving this from book by a very famous scholar, Dr. Divya Banu Singh, who has written The Lions of Asia. According to him, this might have other echoes, but I am quoting it in Hindi. Gujarati mujhe aati nahi hai. The local newspaper said, Nar Indra will meet one Raj. The Indra of the king of men will meet king of beasts. And if you see the pictures, it's interesting. Jawaharlal Nehru and members of his group, including Mrs. Indira Gandhi, they wore the khaki. They wore khaki overcoat because khaki was worn by the Junagadh foresters. Now, the lions had not been hunted for many years. Small numbers of lions were shot, but they were still not fully trusting of visitors. The Pramukh of the Saurashtra chiefs was Digvijay Singh. Digvijay Singh is from the same family of the famous cricketer Prince Ranji. Jam Sahib of Nawanagar. Okay, so he took them and they went and they didn't shoot the lions, they watched them. And it is at his instance that Saurashtra government started what is called the Lion Show. They would bring groups of tourists to see the lions. 1952, the Indian Board for Wildlife was formed. And 1952 is a very important moment in India because it was the first general election, the largest election ever in history. Indians who had voted ourselves democratic constitution in the Constituent Assembly. 51-52 is the first election. Same year was the Indian Board for Wildlife. Interestingly, the head of Indian Board for Wildlife was the Maharaja of Mysore. Now, the Mysore rulers go back to the defeat of Tipu Sultan, the Wadiyars. And Tipu Sultan, as you know, had a very interesting symbol, the tiger. The Wadiyar dynasty, however, had a different symbol. it had a very unusual bird called a Dodda Peranda. This is Kannada. It means the two-headed heron. So you can see association of particular birds and animals with royalty. Now, Professor Upinder Singh, in her book, and I'm also quoting Kathy Morrison's work on Vijayanagar, has a very interesting revelation, which was I must say, every time I reread that, I am struck by how original this observation is and how so many of us who are less educated on pre-1800 history miss it. I was under impression that lion, Simha, was a symbol of imperial power. You can think of, the independent India's official emblem, the three lions. And the lions are, of course, adapted from the lion capital of Ashoka. And Ashoka is a very important ruler, not only because he adopted policy of peace after Kalinga, but because if you see the fifth pillar edict and Girnar edict, anyone who has not gone to National Museum of India, if you go outside National Museum, there is copy of these edicts. They are remarkable edicts because they are about compassion to the animals. He limits the number of animals killed in royal kitchen. He declares a creature protected, which is clearly the rhinoceros. Another animal is a very large creature living in the Ganges, which may have been a Ganges dolphin, we don't know. He put controls on the burning of the forests. But to come back, the animals which were associated according to them with royalty were the bull, the lion, and the elephant. So it's very interesting. This association of power is there actually in the official emblem. In fact, if you look at the rupee carefully, it has a horse, it has a bull, and it has the lion capital. Now, what would be the fate of animals in independent India? So Indian Board of Wildlife took stock of the situation. There were two very eminent Indians in it who studied not animals but birds. One was Dharam Kumar Singh. Dharam Kumar Singh was the Yuvraj of Bhavnagar state, educated in England, very remarkable man. In the 50s, he conducted a study of a remarkable bird, the great Indian bustard, which is now perhaps on edge of extinction. He prepared plans of how to protect it. He had grown up as a shikari. He had even been present at lion hunts in the Gir forest, but he became a conservationist. And along with another very important figure, he made sure that the idea of wildlife did not only include big game animals, tiger, lion, elephant, gaur, rhino, but also birds. And the other, of course, was Dr. Salim Ali. And Dr. Salim Ali was from one of the first Indian millionaire families, the Tayyabjis. Badruddin Tayyabji had been president of the Congress. Salim Ali was trained in Germany. He worked in Burma. And in the 1940s, he did something very remarkable. He teamed up with an American who was on war service in India, Second World War, called S. Dillon Ripley. They started writing a book in 1948. And believe it or not, they completed it as late as 1976. It's a 13-volume book with a completely inappropriate title, Handbook of the Birds of India and Pakistan. Now, you would imagine handbook is a small book, the size of cell phone. You can put it in your pocket, take it to field. Well, this was a misnomer. But it's very interesting when Salim Ali gave a very important lecture once. The chair was the first Indian Minister of Education and Culture, Maulana Abul Kalam Azad. And Azad Sahab said to Salim Ali that, Dr. Salim Ali, I have been waiting to meet you from the time we were in the Ahmednagar fort. It seems in Ahmednagar fort, the 12-13 prisoners had very little to do. There were very important people there. There was Achar Narendra Dev. There was Jawaharlal Nehru. There was Maulana Abul Kalam Azad and several others. What they did is they got a copy of Salim Ali's book and they tried to watch the birds outside the jail ward and in the fort. This was a very famous book, the Book of Indian Birds, which came out during the Second World War. So India is a very unusual country because this is the first book of birds of a country written by an Asian, not a European, other than Bunsong Lekagul in Thailand, never a colony, and many excellent books published in Japan by the Japanese, and Japan was never a colony. So India is a very unusual country already by 1950s. It has an intelligentsia, men like Dharam Kumar Singh, or for that matter, Dr. Salim Ali. I want to mention two others who to me are very important. One was an Englishman who stayed back, E.P. Gee. E.P. Gee was a tea planter. As early as 1939, he had written articles in the Journal of the Bombay Natural History Society. He stopped hunting and he lived on in India right up to the late 60s. He retired and went to England where he died in 1968. E.P. Gee was a member of the Indian Board for Wildlife, and in 1953 he did something which naturalists all over the world dream of. He found a new species of mammal. It was called the golden langur. It is a very important animal. It is protected in Bhutan. It's protected in the Bodo Autonomous Territory, and in Assam there are less than 5,000 of them. This was the first discovery of a new species. And when I say discovery, it is by modern science. The people in those areas, Bodos and others, knew the animal was there. But Presbytis ghee, as it was named, or Ghee's golden langur, was the first discovery by modern scientific description of a new macaque species or monkey on the Asian mainland since Indonesia in 1908. I want to emphasize something which was evident to these wise men and women in the 1950s, though their voices were not often heeded: the clearing of forests, the taking over of forests for raw material for industry, particularly for plywood and paper, the construction of large dams. Temples of modern India often came at the cost of the natural heritage. The clearing of areas for townships. When you think of Bokaro, Bhilai, they were set up in what were earlier forests. And this period of 47 to 67 largely was a period of free for all. There were correctives, but they came only at the end of 60s. What I want to emphasize is that in the 50s and 60s, there starts to be a new kind of argument advanced by a very important Indian who had a BSc in botany. I referred to large animals, I referred to small animals and birds. I want to emphasize you cannot think of faunal diversity, different kinds of animals, without thinking of floral diversity. We always like to think of India as a land of great cultural riches. The Indian rupee note, it is written 1 rupee in 22 national languages. There are several other languages spoken in India. India is a land where there are many different faiths which are practiced. There are different ways of eating, drinking, dressing. But much of this diversity is also linked to the great diversity of the animals, birds, and plants of India. If you look at the map of the world, you'd find north, central, western India. There were animals, birds, and plants which are typical of the open countryside. The lion, the cheetah, the gazelle, the acacia. Acacia in Hindi is known as babul, since Professor Mayank Kumar is here, he will not be happy if I don't refer to Rajasthan. In Rajasthan, there are two large regions known as Mewar. Mewar includes Udaipur and the famous Maharana Pratap. And then there's Marwar, which is the area of the desert, Jodhpur, Bikaner, Jaisalmer. And there is a famous saying, Babul, Babul, Marwar, Aunla, Aunla, Mewar. And it's been commented on that the historic division line between these regions of Mewar and Marwar, where the Boli is Marwadi and Mewadi, is the yellow flowers of the Aunla and the spiky thorny tree of the Babul. You could look at the North and South India. One of the animals very familiar in North India is the bandar or the rhesus macaque. Roughly speaking, North and South India, the division is between the rhesus macaque in the north and the bonnet macaque, a much smaller animal, to the south. In Eastern India, its place is taken by the Assamese macaque. So Northern India, and it's not specific to Northern India, many of these species spill over to the south. In 1989, there was a very important book written in French, The Jungle and the Aroma of Meats, Ecological Themes in Hindu Medicine. Francis Zimmerman, translated 4 years later. It's most remarkable book. Because Zimmerman argues that if you read the Sanskrit pharmacopoeias, Charaka, Susruta, and others, I don't, so I'm relying on him, but I verified this. The very important animal for them is known as the Krishna Mriga. Krishna Mriga is black buck, Antilopa cervicapra. So again, to go back to Mahabharata, when the Arjuna wins hand of Draupadi, he was remembered in disguise as a Brahmana and all that. So the various Brahmins, they were very happy. So they took out their deer skins and waved them. Now, if you read the description of the deer skin, Mantol in Tamil, it's of the Krishna Mrig, that is of the black buck skin. So the black buck, according to Zimmerman, was the centerpiece of Sanskritic civilization. Wherever the black buck roamed was the land of the fire sacrifice, Aryavarta. Now, the reality is black bucks range far south. There are black buck as far south as Tirunelveli in South India, the Point Kalimere Bird Sanctuary. And the black buck, incidentally, is the state animal, not only of Haryana, where I used to work in Ashoka University in Sonipat, though there aren't any black buck now in Sonipat, but also, interestingly, Andhra Pradesh, where I am now. But I'm just trying to emphasize that, this north, central, western India has a lot of animals and birds which it shares with West Africa, West Asia, Central Asia, and Africa. The lion is only one of them, the cheetah would be the other. If you go into the Himalayas, and the Himalayas are a vast mountain chain, they are part of a greater mountain chain which stretches into North and Central Asia and could sweeps eastward and ends with the Great Plateau of Tibet. And here there are animals such as the snow leopard, first photographed in the wild as recently as 1974, a variety of species of wild sheep and goats, pheasants, fir trees, pine trees. These are reminiscent of a Nearctic and alpine realm, which is very widespread through parts of Asia and Europe. It has brown bears, for example. And then there are the animals which India has been famous for through the ages: the elephant, the tiger, the sloth bear. Older people in the room will recall this has now been outlawed. The bhalu, which dances, and that bhalu is the sloth bear, which has a V-neck and huge termite claws in order to rip aside termite mounds. So India is the meeting place, if you like, the sangam of these three great biogeographic realms: the Ethiopian, the Alpine, and the Oriental. If you look beyond that, and one should never forget that the land of 3 million square kilometers is also bounded by great oceans. And in these oceans, there are enormous creatures. The largest species of fish in the world, the whale shark, which was hunted until recently off the coast of Gujarat. It's been a very large scheme by Wildlife Trust of India, Gujarat government, and others to popularize that the whale shark should not be hunted. It's a very gentle creature. In fact, contrary to the very wrong image of shark given films like Jaws, which is, by the way, a different species, great white shark, whale shark only eats very tiny creatures. It never harms humans. Between the waters just off India, Maldives, near Sri Lanka, there's also been sightings of the blue whale, which is one of probably the largest animal which is found on Earth today. We were fond of mugging up in college, and school rather, that 3 double-decker buses could be parked on the back of a blue whale. Unfortunately, that has never happened. And fortunately for the whale, and unfortunately for us as schoolboys and girls, we never got to ride in one of those buses. So this great richness of fauna and flora. The flora includes 25,000 species of flowering plants. And I want to emphasize M. Krishnan, because M. Krishnan, right from the 40s, when he gave up his job as advisor to Maharaja of Sandur and started earning his living, which he would for 48 years, as a nature photographer, as a writer on natural history, writing in the Statesman, writing in Tamil, writing occasionally in the Hindu, also the Illustrated Weekly. Krishnan began to argue that a country is not only typified because of its human heritage. And mind you, Krishnan was a very great scholar of Sanskrit, but more so of Tamil. His father, Madhavaya, was one of the very important writers of Tamil, and modern Tamil prose derived enormously from the richness of his writings. Krishnan would argue that a country is also characterized by the ways in which different natural features, the mountains, the rivers, the swamps, the trees, the flowers, the birds, the animals, are part of its culture. He would often cite a famous line from the Silai Padikaram, from the Sangam literature, in which a man who is far away from home looks up into the sky and asks a bird that, "Oh bird, when you go south, please tell my wife I will be late for dinner." And he then describes that this very strange bird with a peculiar beak, it does not catch fish. It dips its very beautiful head into the water, takes out the muddy slime, and extracts from the slime its food. And I'm sure you have described this was the flamingo. Krishnan would argue that the estuary of Pichavaram, the gazelle, the ghorpad, were as important as the majestic elephant or the samba. And it is due to the efforts of men such as Krishnan that in the late 1960s, a very important change would come about. You know that in late 1960s, it was time of great political turmoil and upheaval all over the world. US was embroiled in war in Vietnam, in which while fighting the guerrillas, it did something very important. It invented what Zerner has called the weapon of ecocide. To fight the guerrillas, they sprayed herbicide on the forest and tried to kill the forests and the trees. They almost succeeded, though they lost the war. It's taken independent Vietnam a lot of effort to revive the forests and the mangroves destroyed by the herbicides. It was a time the Soviet forces went into Czechoslovakia. There was the civil rights movement in America, women's movement all over the world. In India, it was a time when monsoon failed twice. Congress party's majority in the parliament went down to 283 in House of 421. And the 2 years of drought led India to have to import over 20 million tons of grain from the United States, for which it had to pay in foreign exchange, which it didn't have. This led to many changes which were broadly called the Green Revolution. And one of the impacts of Green Revolution, and today is not a day to get into detail, is that by 1972, India ceased to be a net food importer. And this meant that it was not reliant on American grain the way some of our African brothers, sisters are in sub-Saharan Africa today. They may buy, the maize from Ukraine and wheat from Russia, but they are not able to grow enough food because they have not been able to invest technologically in modern methods. One of the other consequences of the double drought, was there was new awareness of the importance of forests. The first woman Prime Minister, Mrs. Indira Gandhi, spoke in Bangalore University in January of '66, soon after taking office. People normally don't look at these speeches, but if you look at it, it has a very interesting sentence. It says the recent shortage of food had to do with failure of rains. It's not only a curse of nature, it's also because we have not protected our forests. The destruction of forests due to large dams and opening up for agriculture might harm our water security and food security. So in the late 1960s, there is a very interesting change. In 1969, Mrs. Gandhi addressed the International Union for Conservation of Nature, where she said that we do need foreign exchange, but not at the cost of the most beautiful furred and feathered inhabitants of our land. The magnificent tiger, the rhinoceros and elephant are in danger of extinction. And she said, we should not look at forests from a narrow accountant's point of view, unquote. At this time in the same meeting, one of the people who objected to putting the tiger on the Red Book, first step to making it protected species, was a very famous political leader. He was killed in a very awful attack by Maoists some years ago, Vidyacharan Shukla. Vidyacharan Shukla was the owner of Alvin Cooper and Company. And he quoted the figure I just cited a few minutes ago. He said, each tiger which is shot dead by tourists earns 40,000 rupees of foreign exchange. Can we give it up? Now, 69-70 is also a very important year. It was abolition of privy purses, nationalization of banks. And in his writings, Dr. Ullas Karan, leading tiger biologist, has argued that this period 69 to 72 was a time of very swift measures to protect the natural heritage and forests. The tiger was listed in the Red Book. Export of leopard and tiger skins was banned. The director of Delhi Zoo, Kailash Singh Sankhala, who was from the Forest Service from Rajasthan, got a fellowship to study the Indian tiger. His conclusion, there are only 2,500 left. He based his study on the records of hunters, that is sport hunters, and discussions with foresters in different parts of the country. In the same time, the Bombay Natural History Society conducted surveys of the gharial. Gharial, incidentally, is very ancient crocodilian. It is even older than most famous dinosaur in modern history because it has become a film star par excellence. Even small boys and girls will tell you T-Rex stands for Tyrannosaur. Well, even before Tyrannosaur existed, the Ganges, the Gavial or the Gharial was found in the waters of Ganga, Brahmaputra, Indus, and its numbers had vastly reduced by this time. There was also a study of another very important animal, very, very critical in independent India, the wild buffalo, the Arna. And the wild buffalo is the ancestor of the domestic water buffalo, which, as you know, was behind the success of India in Operation Flood. So every time you have milk, butter, cheese, you should thank the buffalo, which is the source of most of the milk in India. Cow is also very important, but in tonnage terms, it's buffalo. But the ancestor of the buffalo, the wild buffalo, was in trouble. So I think in 69 to 72, there are a lot of steps taken. One of them was that there was a coup, which Dr. Karanth, of course, is happy about. In 1969, the lion became the national animal. In 1972, it was replaced by the tiger. When he was asked why this was done, Dr. Karan Singh, the chairman of the Indian Board for Wildlife, first denied the insinuation by a journalist that this is because his nickname was Tiger. He was, as you know, the last princely ruler of Kashmir, and he said this is not true. And he said the tiger has been made the national animal because it is in danger. By making the tiger national animal, we want to create awareness of our natural heritage. And this natural heritage is common to all Indians, whatever our politics and other divisions. The tiger, he said, is a symbol of unity and diversity because it is found in 11 of 16 states. That time India had 16 states, now there are 28. There were 9 tiger reserves and they were in 8 states. They included 1972-73, India launches the world's then largest wildlife conservation program. And it was argued, Kailash Sankla, the first director, would argue that the aim of Project Tiger was to do nothing and not let anybody do anything. First, the journalist thought something's wrong with director Project Tiger. What is he saying? And he explained that Indian forestry was about changing the flora of the forest, growing the teak, the sal, the shisham, which were important for revenue. But this was a new view of the forest where all the plants and animals were part of one web. The tiger was the top of the food chain. By protecting the tiger and ensuring its security and safety and of its cubs and the tigresses and all that, they would protect the plants and animals and reptiles and insects of the forest. So the tiger would become, he said, an index of environmental quality. These 9 tiger reserves would create among the people a deep realization that nature is a unified entity. And it's very important that there have been many political changes in India, but the 1972 Wildlife Act, the tiger reserves have endured those changes. 1977, there was big change. First time Congress lost the election. Morarji Bhai Desai became the first non-Congress Prime Minister of India. Few months after that, Dr. Salim Ali met him, and I am quoting from Dr. Salim Ali's editorial in Hornbill. Dr. Salim Ali used to be bringing out a popular newspaper, the newsletter, the Hornbill. It was called Meeting the Prime Minister. So he asked Prime Minister Morarji Desai, I hope wildlife conservation will continue. It will not be regarded as something because of emergency. And Morarji Bhai assured him that he would do so. And he said that he was not unfamiliar with problems of forest conservation. He had been deputy collector of Thane district, and he had tried to set up cooperatives to help the Adivasis to extract forest resources without being harassed by the forest department. Morarji Desai then asked a very important question. He said, Dr. Salim Ali, it is very good that you want to protect animals like tiger and leopard, but have you ever talked to the panchayat presidents and people who live in villages? Unless you enlist them in your cause, how will they want to live with these big animals which kill their cattle? How can conservation succeed if it is not a people's movement? I think Morarji Bhai had another very important part of his credentials. He is not widely enough credited with a very important step he took in 78. See, from the 1930s, animals became very important in medical testing. Many people here would know about, polio vaccination. The polio vaccine of Jonas Salk was first tried on very important animal from India, the rhesus monkey. Hundreds of thousands of monkeys were exported from India, Pakistan, Bangladesh. And in 70s, there was also concern they were not only be used for medical, but for military testing, including the neutron bomb. And one of the petitioners was a very important Indian who played a critical role in the reinvention of Bharatanatyam in South India, the great Leela Samson. It was Rukmani Devi Arunde, her guru. And Rukmani Devi, in fact, petitioned on behalf of the Society for Prevention of Cruelty to Animals. She had links with a group called the Primate Protection League, primate scholars from all over the world who did not want apes and monkeys subject to these extremely inhuman tests. This movement still continues. But one of the important turning points was in 1978, India banned the export of rhesus and bonnet macaques for research. It's a very important turning point. In this time, there was a very major development. In 74, a scientist from Madras Snake Park, very unusual man, Romulus Whittaker. Many Indians have relatives in America. 1965, America changed immigration routes. Only whites were allowed to go there from 1900s. It was a racist immigration policy. So a lot of Indians went and settled. Well, this was a man who went in reverse direction. He was American. He came to India, married an Indian and settled here. Romulus Whittaker, a fluent Tamil speaker, founded the Madras Snake Park and the Crocodile Bank. And Whittaker's team went to a place in Kerala known as Silent Valley. It is called Silent because there were no cicadas. And the Silent Valley became a very big cause celebre. There was a huge movement to protect the rainforest. And the dam eventually was not built. Morarji Bhai and the local government headed by CPI had a different view. When Mrs. Gandhi came to power in 80 and by 1985, the dam was shelved, other alternatives were discovered and Silent Valley became a national park. There have been many changes between late 80s, early 90s and now. One of them is that globalization and liberalization has unleashed new patterns of economic growth. There are huge pressures on the forests, the marine systems, the hills, the valleys. These are of a sort, frankly, nobody was prepared for 50 years ago. Think of the growth of mega cities such as Delhi And there are many part of Aravallis which have been devastated, not for deforestation, but limestone mining to make cement for the growing city of Delhi. We think of the growth of Chennai, the great city of Chennai, destroying the wetlands around. And one of the results is that in 2021 and 2015, there have been devastating floods because water which was drained away into the wetlands is now threatening large parts of the city. The city is threatening to swallow nature, whether forest, mountain, or wetland. This is equally true of Kolkata. The Sundarbans mangroves are very well known to all of you. They are very famous home of the Bengal tiger, and the mangroves are a very important symbol of a tiger reserve which stretches across India, 1973 tiger reserve, into Bangladesh. The independent Bangladesh has also protected the tiger. It's a remarkable symbol of cooperation between two friendly countries. Similarly, the Manas tiger reserve stretches from the Indian part with the golden langurs, our friends, and also into Bhutan. But I think we should be clear that in the 21st century, the question of faunal conservation is not about protecting these large animals or small, the plants or the various microbes. This protection is vital for human survival. This emerged in Silent Valley, which had so many different plant species which are critical to domestic cultivated plants and for medicinal purposes. It's important with wetlands because wetlands recharge the water sources and they are breeding grounds of vast species of fish, which are very important for sustaining livelihoods, both in the inland water systems and in the coastal areas. We also face a very difficult legacy. Many of the parks I referred to, Gir, Bandipur, originated in princely India, where the Rajwadas often did not treat the people as equal. In eastern India, and Brodsin's Gold and Bhojuram Gujar have written that when the Ghatyali Raj ended in Savar, the peasants and the herders went into the bramble bushes and killed the wild boars because they hated the feudal oppressions of the former gentry. In Sundarbans, many of the people were evicted very brutally in 1978 by the then state government, and some were shot dead. And interestingly, they told a researcher, Annu Jalai, that we are referred to as Chotolok. We are not Chotolok. We are Nimno Vargos, people of lower classes. They said they had no problem with tigers. In their own mythology, they were refugees from, the persecution in East Pakistan. And the tigers were refugees from Java. They claimed that they were people who had walked the land to seek shelter in the mangrove forest, while the tigers had swarmed from Java and found shelter. So I think one of the remarkable features of India is that there are large numbers of extremely poor people who live very close to nature. How can we reduce the levels of conflict they face due to everyday life? Professor Kumar referred to Elephant Task Force, and one of the very sad parts of Elephant Task Force was we found 400 people being killed every year by elephants. Elephants, as you know, do not eat people. They have no quarrel with humans. And most of the people were farmers or cultivators and laborers protecting their crops. Now, we need to have a realization. Over 100 elephants are killed by people. Today, by the way, many of the tuskers have already been killed by poachers. There are many tuskers in the forest. But 50 to 60 of the elephants killed by people are killed in the fields. Today, the numbers are higher. Number of elephants is over 100. The task force report is 2010. Number of humans killed is 600. They are both victims. The elephant is victim. The humans who are not well off are also victim. How do we devise a system to protect both? That's one. The other big question in faunal conservation is how do we cannot, and it is not humanly wise or practical for a developing nation emerging on the world stage to give up modern industrial progress and development. We can debate this. There are people who will say small is beautiful. I respect them. But can it be planned in a way that it minimizes the negative impact on nature? And one of the sensible ways to assess that is the landscape still able to support this vast diversity of life? Tigers may be possible to save in 50 tiger reserves and adjacent landscapes. But there's a range of other animals and birds which can live very close to humans. So I'll end with this, that nature, science and history are at crossroads. Amrit Mahotsav India should celebrate the great cultural heritages of India. Temples of Belur and Halebid, Elephanta caves, the remarkable Bodhi tree and all of that. But it also has to celebrate and accept the natural heritage. After all, the description of the change of seasons, even today, for many Indians, is by when a particular flower comes, when a particular bird calls, when a particular tree drops its leaves. This is a very powerful cultural links we have, not only with the birds, flowers, plants, but we must remember with each other. And can this living fabric be protected? And for that, All three of these are important: history, science, and nature. The sense of the past, the awareness of nature works, and how, drawing on the past, we get insights to create the peace with nature, which is vital for a peace among people. Because the big challenge of the 21st century is not only to end the war between nations or the war in the minds and hearts of people. It is that peace between nations, peace between among peoples, has to be accompanied by a peace with nature. This is important not only for our own survival, it is also important because it is critical for the harmony of the larger planet. And I would argue that while the challenges in India are vast, I think independent India has disproved the great Jim Corbett. The tiger has survived, and I think much else can. But if it will only be if we learn from our past, draw from science, and create a broad new sense of community. Thank you, Jay.